The Many Saints of Newark, a Sopranos Story, is set to be released later this year, with the film being a prequel to HBO's crime drama The Sopranos. It's been over 10 years since The Sopranos finished its run, but its popularity and reach has only been increasing. With the show following the life of New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano, played by James Gandolfini, the movie will be a prequel set during Tony's youth, with the character being played by Gandolfini's real-life son, Michael. The movie will showcase the relationship between Tony and his mentor, Dickie Moltisanti, played by Alesandro Nivola, who will be the main character in the film. Dickie was a guide to Tony, and most likely his road to life in the mafia, and there are said to be stark parallels between the relationship between Dickie and Tony in the film and Tony and Christopher in the show. In fact, Tony even says exactly this during a therapy session with Dr Melfi, saying, regarding Christopher, his dad Dickie was like my me to him. And when Melfi asks, a mentor? Tony becomes emotional and replies, more than that, a friend, a guy you could look up to, and the hope is that you pass that shit down, the respect and the love. The trailer for the film was released just a few days ago, and both Dickie and Tony are all over it. So who is this Dickie Moltisanti? Who is this much talked about character from The Sopranos who we've never really seen aside from a few old photos, and who died in the 70s, long before the events in The Sopranos even take place? Since the movie will quite clearly reveal many things about the character, his overall nature, his relationship with Tony, and perhaps even his death, let's take a recap and go through what we know about the character. There are no spoilers for the movie in this video. The information from this video comes from The Sopranos. Richard Dickie Moltisanti was the father of Christopher Moltisanti and the husband of Joanne Moltisanti, Christopher's mother. He's also the cousin of Carmela, Tony Soprano's wife. There are several lines in the show which allude to the relationship we're going to be seeing between Tony and Dickie in the film, like Tony referring to him as a stand-up guy, and Adriana telling an FBI agent, but he was always kinda like a big brother to Tony. In fact, their almost sibling-like relationship, according to Adriana, is why Tony calls Christopher his nephew. In case you didn't know, Christopher isn't actually Tony's nephew. He's described by Adriana as being a cousin to Carmela, with Dickie being her first cousin. Speaking with Variety, Nivola himself has said, Dickie, as he's mentioned throughout the Sopranos series, was an important figure in Tony's life. He was a real mentor figure, because Tony's dad was in prison a lot and Dickie didn't have any children until later in his life, until his early 40s, and so he treated Tony like a surrogate son. Dickie was a soldier in the Sopranos crew. He worked under Tony's father, Johnny Boy, who is being played by Jon Bernthal in the film. It seems, according to Tony at least, Dickie was extremely efficient as a mobster. Tony says he was a legend and that he single-handedly hunted down that New England crew, brought the war home to them up there. Dickie also served time in the US Navy during the Vietnam War, and we also learned that he later served prison time. A bitter Joanne's conversation with Christopher suggests that Dickie did not spend a lot of time at home with his family. Like most men in the Sopranos mob, Dickie is thought to have slept around with women, as implied by Tony's line to his wife in the show during one of their fights regarding Tony's mistresses, where he says, "Who the fuck did you think I was when you married me? You knew my father. You grew up around Dickie Moltisanti." Dickie died before events in The Sopranos take place, and according to Tony, his death had something to do with a man called Gilly Ruffalo. Gilly was in prison with Dickie, and he murdered Dickie's cellmate by stabbing him to death. When Dickie was released on parole, he took revenge on Gilly by tracking him down, and he gouged his eye out. Tony says he took out his eye so bad he couldn't even put a glass one in. Later, when Christopher is just a baby, Dickie is shot outside his home whilst carrying TV trays. Christopher was of the opinion that Dickie was bringing home a crib for his son, which obviously adds even more sentimental and emotional weight to Dickie's death, but Tony clarifies that it was TV trays he was carrying, not a crib. Now, the most interesting thing regarding Dickie in the show is that his killer was allegedly Detective Lieutenant Barry Haydu. Haydu was hired by Gilly Ruffalo to murder Dickie for what he did to him. According to Tony, Haydu was allowed to live because he was useful. They don't mention this, but I imagine that since he was a cop, he wasn't exactly someone the Sopranos could take out without facing heavy repercussions. Either way, when all of this is being told to Christopher by Tony in 2022, Haydu had just retired from the force. Tony gives Christopher the go-ahead to kill his father's murderer, which he does in Hadu's home after interrogating him. However, and it's one of the great Sopranos mysteries, but fans have long speculated whether Hadu really did kill Dickie Moltisanti, and whether this wasn't just a case of Tony manipulating Christopher to gain his loyalty, and at the same time take out an undesirable. After all, Hadu repeatedly denies killing Dickie, telling Christopher he's being set up, and yet just before he dies, he repeatedly says, "I'm sorry," suggesting that maybe the truth finally came out at the end. However, just to throw another spanner into the works, some say it wasn't actually Hadu saying "I'm sorry," but that was coming from the episode of Magnum P.I. that was being played in the house. I'm sure die-hard fans of Magnum will be able to clarify for us. If you watch the scene again, it does look like the thought that Tony is lying does cross Christopher's mind, but ultimately he tells Hadu it doesn't matter, as either way, Tony wants the guy dead. So it seems like to me, going off of lines from the show and what we saw in the trailer, that Tony will feel alienated from his family. He won't feel love and comfort from his mother, nor will he share a close relationship with his father. He doesn't make an effort in school in spite of being intelligent, and in general is a character who has not found his place in the world. Dickie will, I assume, fill all the holes for Christopher. He will be a proper father to him, an older brother, a guide, someone to give him direction and vision, only, of course, direction down a path that leads Tony to self-destruction. Speaking of self-destruction, it is alluded that Dickie is a drug addict and suffers from alcohol addiction, which Christopher feels he inherited from his father. One of my favourite lines from the show, simply because of the way it deconstructs this legendary character, is when Christopher tells Tony, "My dad, your hero, wasn't much more than a fucking junkie." Now, this brings up something interesting. Sopranos fans might wonder, why is it that Tony always speaks so admirably of Dickie and yet no one else ever talks about him? Well, if there is truth to Christopher's statement that he was a junkie, he wouldn't have the respect in the mob that we're told he would have. Of course Tony will constantly big him up, he's the guy's hero, but it may be that Dickie is something of an outcast in the crew due to his addictions. Uncle Junior even tells Tony in the show to kill Chris because his addictions make him a liability. So, if it's also the case that Dickie is an addict, then he might not be all that Tony cracks him up to be in the movie. And maybe, who knows, maybe the mob ordered his death. Maybe it wasn't the cop who killed him, but Tony's own father. What if Tony made his bones by killing Dickie? Who knows? Maybe the Many Saints of Newark will finally put an end to the mystery. Or maybe they never address it at all, and Dickie is alive and well by the end of the movie, with his death remaining one of the biggest talking points of The Sopranos. For more videos and similar content, consider subscribing to the channel, and thanks for watching.